What does it say when a rising power finds itself paying a Washington insider to flag its Prime Minister's social media posts to the White House? Since April 2025, the Narendra Modi government has been paying SHW Partners LLC $1.8 million a year, that's $150,000 every month, to lobby President Donald Trump's administration, even as US tariffs on Indian goods have only climbed higher. The disclosure has drawn attention not because lobbying is unusual, far from it, but because of what the lobbyists are actually doing. Flagging Prime Minister Modi's posts, smoothing optics, arranging meetings for External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, even coordinating White House Diwali celebrations. Aren't these core diplomatic functions? If tariffs remain, pressure persists, and access still feels transactional, is India spending millions just to stay in the conversation? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. India hired SHW Partners on the 24th of April 2025 amid the fallout of the Pahalgam terror attack, Operation Sindoor diplomacy, and a rapidly souring trade relationship with Washington, D.C. The idea was straightforward: use a Trump world insider to maintain access when formal channels were under strain. Lobbying, after all, is a standard diplomatic tool in Washington. But months later, tariffs doubled, trade tensions hardened, and the same lobbyists were still chasing meetings and managing symbolism. If the goal was influence and relief, has this approach delivered leverage or merely added an expensive parallel track to India's own embassy? To understand why this matters, one must first strip away the drama and look at the mechanics. SHW Partners was hired under a one-year contract worth $1.8 million annually, paid in quarterly advances of $450,000. The firm is led by Jason Miller, a longtime Trump confidant and campaign veteran whose value lies not in policy expertise alone, but in proximity. Proximity to the White House, to Trump's inner circle, and to the informal pathways where access is often decided. This was not subtle diplomacy. It was an explicit bet on insider navigation in Trump's America First ecosystem. The scope of work was wide and clearly defined: strategic counsel, tactical planning, government relations, media management, outreach to the White House, Congress, the National Security Council, State Department, think tanks, and academics. In other words, SHW was meant to help India remain visible, audible, and relevant at a time when Washington was growing more punitive and less patient. None of this is unusual in isolation. Countries across the world do this. India itself has done it repeatedly in the past. But the discomfort begins when the filings reveal the nature of activities. Calls and emails to secure meetings for External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, follow-ups with senior US officials, coordination around diplomatic visits, handling logistics linked to White House Diwali celebrations, disseminating and flagging Prime Minister Narendra Modi's social media posts to White House officials. These are not rogue activities, but they sit in an ambiguous space. Lobbying is meant to supplement diplomacy, not mirror it. When the two begin to overlap so visibly, it invites a legitimate question about roles, redundancy, and return on investment.
The Indian embassy itself has always had between 2 to 3 or 4 maximum lobby firms, one which is closer to the Democratic Party, one closer to the Republican Party. In some cases, the Williams Group, for example, has been hired for the last few years, which is an African-American caucus. So for different periods of time, the Indian embassy and other embassies have used different lobby firms. So it is actually quite common to have a lobby firm. The question is what that lobby firm does for you. For the Indian side, diplomats that we speak to make it very clear that lobby firms are supposed to explain the landscape, they're supposed to advise, they're supposed to open doors. But when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to bilateral, relations between the two countries, fixing engagements, for example, for the External Affairs Minister or for other senior officials with senior officials in the US administration, then that is something squarely done by the Indian embassy and the Indian embassy's diplomats, not by a foreign lobbyist.
One can argue that Washington today does not function on formal protocols alone. Trump's White House is famously personality-driven, media-sensitive, and informal in its decision-making. In such an environment, embassies can struggle to break through without external reinforcement. Hiring a firm like SHW is therefore not a reflection of weakness, but of realism. If access requires intermediaries, then intermediaries must be used.
I mean, that's literally the way of doing business in Washington, D.C. In fact, there is an entire street called the K Street that is only devoted to lobby firms. Countries, even closer allies of the U.S., like Saudi Arabia, like many others, even Israel, they all use lobbyists. I mean, India did not use as many lobbyists earlier. We use lobbyists now. Besides, the atmosphere in Washington is different. The people are different. So you need the lobbyists. And it's perfectly normal to use lobbyists for meetings, for calls, to influence administration officials. It's perfectly normal.
Yet realism does not eliminate scrutiny. The hiring came after Trump imposed tariffs on Indian goods, initially 25%, later doubled to 50%, citing India's Russian oil imports and BRICS alignments. These tariffs hit up to 70% of Indian exports to the United States, reshaping trade dynamics and undercutting exporters. This was the central problem SHW was meant to help manage. And yet, despite months of intense lobbying activity, tariffs persisted, escalated even, and became a defining feature of the relationship. This is where the questioning sharpens. If lobbying is meant to change outcomes, how should success be measured here? Is success simply maintaining dialogue when relations are otherwise deteriorating? Is it preventing further escalation? Or is it achieving concrete relief? The answer matters because $1.8 million a year is not a symbolic sum. It is a serious investment, especially when paid out in advance. The FARA filings show relentless activity. Dozens of contacts across the US system, outreach to White House officials, NSC staffers, cabinet-level officers, congressional aides, and media figures. Persistent follow-ups to secure meetings for Indian officials, including Jaishankar. This is not the picture of a firm sitting idle. It is the picture of urgency. But urgency does not automatically translate into effectiveness.
I think where the questions come up are threefold. One, no matter how important it is to work through a lobbyist, surely the External Affairs Minister of India, the Foreign Secretary of India, the Deputy NSA, the Indian Ambassador himself, do have their own connections. They have their own ways of reaching out to another administration. After all, this is a bilateral relationship. And so therefore, possibly they don't need it. I think the second question is the kind of calls that are being made, because this shows a kind of political involvement as well of the lobbyist. When Prime Minister Modi's tweets, for example, X posts are flagged to the White House, then that call is routed through a lobbyist. And soon after that, we see the telephone calls between the leaders. So I think in where there are sensitive matters involving bilateral relationships, those are questionable. I think the third big question is exactly what happened during Operation Sindoor. We know that India and the US have very, very divergent positions on what happened, how much role the US had in mediation, what kind of role it had, because Mr. Trump has said again and again, he used trade as a leverage to stop the conflict. India has completely denied that. The fact that this particular filings by the lobby firm included so many notings on May the 10th in particular, the day of the ceasefire, but also before and after that, of an involvement of engaging with the White House. The question has to be asked, what were those about? And if after all of that, after the very, very intense kind of engagement through this lobbyist, we still have a year later, Mr. Trump has said some 70, 75 times that, that he mediated the India-Pakistan conflict, that he used trade in order to stop the conflict. That clearly this has not been an effort that paid off. So I think those are the questions that are essentially being asked. The use of the lobby firms is widespread and well known.
The most eye-catching disclosure, the flagging and dissemination of Prime Minister Modi's social media posts, has become a lightning rod because it compresses modern diplomacy into a single image. A Prime Minister tweets, a lobbying firm flags it to the White House. The hope is that tone, goodwill, and perception might soften hardened positions. This tactic is not unique to India. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Turkey, and others have done similar things. It is part of broader shift toward hybrid diplomacy, where policy advocacy, media framing, and digital amplification blend together. Still, optics matter. For a government that projects confidence and strategic autonomy, the idea that paid intermediaries are amplifying its leaders' posts to gain attention at the White House can feel jarring. Not because it is illegitimate, but because it underscores how transactional the environment has become. When access itself has a price tag, even the most confident nations must ask whether they are buying influence or merely renting attention. The overlap with embassy functions intensifies this discomfort. Embassies exist to do precisely what SHW was contracted to do: manage relationships, secure meetings, coordinate visits, and represent national interests. When lobbyists are brought in to perform similar tasks, it raises practical questions. Is the embassy overstretched? Is the political environment too hostile for traditional diplomacy alone? Or is this simply a belt and braces approach, layering advocacy on top of formal engagement? Historically, India has not shied away from lobbying when stakes were high. The civil nuclear deal in the mid-2000s is the clearest example. India spent millions, hired top firms across party lines, mobilized industry and the Indian-American community, and relentlessly pushed its case in Washington. That effort succeeded because it aligned advocacy with a broader strategic convergence between the two countries. The lobbying amplified momentum that already existed. The current situation, however, is different. The SHW contract is not amplifying warmth, it is cushioning friction. It is not selling a grand vision, it is defending space. That makes the task harder and the payoff less visible. When tariffs double despite intense advocacy, it is natural to ask whether the strategy needs adjustment or patience. One can say Trump's America has not moved quickly. Access today may prevent damage tomorrow. The value of SHW may lie not in immediate tariff relief, but in preventing a complete collapse of engagement, in ensuring that India is heard, not ignored, in countering rival narratives, particularly from Pakistan, which hired its own Trump-linked lobbyists to push back against India after Operation Sindoor. That argument has weight. Washington is crowded. Silence is costly. Being absent is worse than being frustrated. From that perspective, $1.8 million is the cost of staying in the game. But even games have scoreboards. And the scoreboard on tariffs, trade, and strategic friction remains unforgiving.
This is a very different administration. This administration is very centralized in the person of the president and the White House. It isn't like it used to be, which is you could do with State Department, with the National Security Council, with the Pentagon, with a whole bunch of other people. That's not the way this administration functions. I mean, the State Department, for instance, just the very fact that the Secretary of State is also the National Security Advisor, tells you a lot, right? That it's not the business as it used to be. So you do need, and there are people who are close to them, to this administration. Remember, this administration comes to came to office believing and that a number of people, certainly many companies, many lobbyists, many sort of influencers they believed them to be paid or part of the Biden administration or the Democrat system, and not the kind of Republican that the Trump administration is. So they are also very sort of close to the people they believe are loyal to the president. And Jason Miller, who runs the lobby firm that India has appointed, is known to be very close to the president, known to have very good access to the president. That works. In this administration, that works. And so you use the tools that work in a particular administration. If we wanted to use the tools that worked in the Obama administration or the Biden administration and use that in a Trump administration, we would be foolish. So we are using the tools that work in this particular administration, and that's literally how it works.
The comparison becomes sharper when Pakistan enters the frame. Islamabad, facing its own credibility crisis in Washington after Operation Sindoor, also turned to a familiar Trump world playbook. In 2025, Pakistan hired Javelin Advisors LLC, led by former Trump aide Keith Schiller, on a contract reportedly worth $2.5 million annually. The mandate was clear: counter India's narrative post-Sindoor, soften Washington's stance, and push back against trade and political pressure. Like India's engagement with SHW Partners, Pakistan's lobbying leaned heavily on insider access rather than formal diplomacy alone. What stands out is not that Pakistan lobbied, this is routine in Washington, but how closely its tactics mirrored India's. Javelin Advisors disseminated Pak administration's social media posts, emailing them to congressional staffers and media figures as part of a digital outreach strategy disclosed under FARA. These posts criticized perceived US bias toward India and framed Pakistan as unfairly targeted. In other words, social media amplification by paid intermediaries was not an Indian exception, but part of a broader regional contest for attention, access, and narrative dominance inside Trump administration. The outcomes, however, complicate the picture further. Pakistan's lobbying coincided with a reduction in US tariffs on Pakistani goods, reportedly from 29% to 19%, and visible shifts in tone from some Trump allies. That does not prove causation, but it does raise uncomfortable comparative questions. If both countries hired Trump-linked lobbyists, both amplified leader messaging, and both framed their positions aggressively, why did one see partial tariff relief while the other faced escalation? Is it a matter of timing, leverage, narrative resonance, or simply transactional politics playing out unevenly? When Pakistan is pushing its case through Trump insiders and digital amplification, opting out may not be a principled stance but a strategic risk. Yet, even this framing does not resolve the core concern. If the playing field rewards narrative agility over substance, how much should a state be willing to pay just to avoid falling behind? There is also a longer-term question about precedent. When lobbying firms begin to handle tasks traditionally managed by embassies, it risks normalizing a dual-track system of representation. Over time, this can blur accountability. If access is secured by lobbyists and policy outcomes remain unfavorable, who answers for the gap? The firm? The embassy? The political leadership that authorized the spend? None of these questions imply wrongdoing. They imply reflection. Democracies owe themselves reflection when public money is deployed in opaque environments like Washington lobbying. Transparency through FARA filings makes this possible, but transparency also invites debate. By late 2025, India had expanded its lobbying footprint further, adding firms like Mercury Public Affairs to its roster. This suggests not retreat, but escalation. A belief that more advocacy, not less, is required to navigate Trump's second term. That belief may prove correct, or it may deepen the sense that influence in Washington has become a costly, uncertain commodity. If lobbying is a standard diplomatic practice, then India's decision fits within established norms. But when lobbyists are arranging meetings for the foreign minister, coordinating White House cultural events, and flagging Prime Minister's posts, it is reasonable to ask where supplementation ends and substitution begins. Thank you for watching Statecraft.